Hello everybody, and thank you for joining me wherever you are. Today is a cold day in Manchester, and let's dive straight into today's daf. So we're doing Shevuot Daf 45 Omid A. Achash Shevuot ha'edos va'achash Shevuot ha'pikodon. V'afidish Shav haya echad mehem mechaz mishachek Kuvia umalda beribis Yonim Visocharei Shivias Sheknegdo Nishba Venotel. One who is considered suspect with regard to oath if he found to have taken a false oath, whether it was an oath of testimony or whether it was an oath on a deposit, or even an oath taken in vain, but finished with a shove, or even an oath taken in vain. Since taking a false oath of the testimony or a false oath about a deposit is behavior that is both offensive to God and harmful to another person, it is clear that one who takes these false oaths cannot be trusted. By contrast, one might have thought the one who merely takes an oath in vain may be relied upon when taking a different oath, since his behavior is offensive only to God. Consequently, the mission states that it is not so, says Rashi, which is a less severe prohibition. There are also categories of people who by rabbinic decree are considered suspect with regard to oath. One of the litigants was a dice player. Mesachek Bekuvia, a dice player. Dice games were a form of gambling throughout the Roman Empire. And Tradition 124b lists dice players among those whom the sages prohibited from providing testimony. There are different opinions with regard to the rationale for this halacha. According to some, the winnings from playing dice are not acquired in a legal manner, because other players do not expect to lose when they place their bets. Therefore, one takes money in this fashion is considered a robber by rabbinic law. Even according to those who say that money won through gambling is not considered stolen, gambling is nevertheless considered despicable behavior. And we understand so there's a picture of an urn depicting Greek soldiers playing dice, and two Roman dice, or one who lends with interest. While the Torah encourages lending money to the needy as a positive act, it prohibits the collection of interest for such a favor. Interest defined as any addition made to the principal in returning the loan to compensate the lender for the time that the money was in the borrower's possession. According to the Torah, it is prohibited to lend or borrow money with interest. Exodus 22:24. Leviticus 25:36-37, Deuteronomy 23:20. Prohibition applies to the borrower, the lender, and any scribe, witness, or guarantor who takes part in the transfer of funds. The prohibition against interest applies to both loans of money and loans of an item, provided that the borrower does not return the goods or item, but rather money or goods of equal value. Any addition of any kind is prohibited as interest. A case where one borrows an item and commits to return a similar item could in effect involve interest if the value of the item to be returned increases in the interim. Among those who fly pigeons, Mafriche Yonim, there is a dispute in Sanhedrin 25a concerning who is included in this category. Some explain that it includes those who place bets on the outcome of pigeon races, and that this qualification is because this is a form of gambling. Others explain that it includes those who train pigeons to bring pigeons from elsewhere, and that the disqualification is due to a concern that this might lead to theft of pigeons belonging to others. Among the vendors of produce of the sabbatical year, Secharei Shavias, during the sabbatical year, the 7th year of the agricultural cycle in Eretz Yisrael, the land must lie fallow. It is prohibited to work the land except for that which is necessary to keep existing crops alive. All produce that grows is ownerless and must be left unguarded in the field so that any creature, including wild beasts and birds, can have ready access to it. As long as the produce remains in the fields, it may be eaten, though it may not be bought and sold in typical manner or used for purposes other than food. After the last remnants of a crop or removed from the field, crop may no longer be eaten unless an eradication ceremony is performed. By rabbinic decree, it is prohibited to eat produce that grew from seeds during this particular year, even if it grew spontaneously. According to some authorities, this last restriction is by Torah. Religiously observant Jews in Israel still observe the halachot of the sabbatical year today. And there's a picture of a field left fallow in Israel during the sabbatical year. Then the litigant opposing him takes an oath and receives payment of his claim. If both litigants were suspect, with regard to oath, then the oath returns to the one who was initially required to take it, and since he is not allowed to take an oath, he must pay in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Others say that they divide the disputed claim in accordance with Rav Nachman's opinion in 47a. The Rabbi Yossi says to divide the claim Rambam Sefer Mishpat Hechad Toan V'Nitan 2 Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 92:7 and the comment of the Ramah. The oath is returned to its place. This is a statement of Rabbi Yossi, as will be explained in the Gemara. Rabbi Meir says, since neither can take an oath, they divide the disputed amount. And how does this halacha apply to the storekeeper relying on his ledger? Chavani al pen koso kezat. If a storekeeper and an employer have a deferred payment arrangement for the employee's purchases, the employer might sometimes tell the storekeeper to pay his labourers or his creditor, and he will reimburse him. In such a case, if the storekeeper claims that he paid what was required on labourers, or the creditor claims they have not received their due, the labourers or the creditor takes an oath that they have not received their due, and the storekeeper takes an oath that he paid what was required, and both sides are paid by the employer. These oaths are by rabbinic ordinance and are taken holding a sacred object. Of Rambam Sefer Mishpat Hechad Vanova 16:5 Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 91:1. This ruling is not referring to a case where a storekeeper says to a customer, "It is written in my ledger that you owe me 200 dinars." Rather, it is referring to a case where a customer says to a storekeeper, "Give my son 2 seah." A seah is a measure of dry volume. It is first mentioned in Genesis 18:6 and used by the sage as a point of reference for all measures of volume. A seah contains 6 kav, which equals 24 log. Estimates of modern equivalent of a seah range from 7.2 to 14.4 liters of wheat. I'll give my labourers a seller in small coins. And later the storekeeper says, I gave it to them, but they say we did not receive it. In such a case, where the father or employer admits that he gave those instructions, and it is also quoted in the storekeeper's ledger, the storekeeper takes an oath that he gave the son the wheat or paid the labourers, and he receives compensation from the father or employer, and labourers take an oath that they were not paid and receive the wages from the employer. Amar ben Nanas. How is it that both these and those come to take an oath in vain? One of them is certainly lying. Rather, the storekeeper receives the compensation without taking an oath, and the labourers receive the wages without taking an oath. If one said to a storekeeper, give me produce valued at a dinar, if a buyer requests produce worth a dinar from a storekeeper who subsequently places the produce in the public domain and demands a dinar, while the buyer claims that he paid it already, the buyer takes an oath by rabbinic ordinance while holding a sacred object, and he takes the produce. This is halacha because the produce has already been left the possession of the storekeeper and is in the public domain according to the explanation of the Rif. I'm going to say for Kin and Hilchot Mechira 27, Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 91:9. And he gave him the produce. And later the storekeeper said to him, give me that dinar that you owe me. And the customer said to him, I gave it to you, and you put it in your wallet. Unpale passed in the Greek, anabole, meaning a wrap around garment. Some suggest it derives from the Latin mapula, meaning kerchief or piece of cloth. The customer shall take an oath that he gave him the dinar. If after the storekeeper gave the money, the customer said to him, give me the produce, the storekeeper said to him, I gave it to you and transported it to your house. If the buyer pays a dinar to a storekeeper for produce and goes to take produce that is in the public domain, but the storekeeper claims that the dinar is payment for the produce that the buyer already took home, the storekeeper takes an oath by rabbinic ordinance while holding a sacred object and retains ownership of the produce. From Sefer Kin and Hilchot Mechira 28, Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 91:9. The storekeeper shall take an oath that he has already filled the order, and he is exempt from supplying the produce. Rabbi Yehuda says, whoever has the produce in his possession has the advantage, and is claimed accepted without taking an oath. Similarly, if one said to a money changer, with regard to a case where the customer comes to change money and gives the money changer a dinar, in order to take small coins piled in a public domain, the halacha depends on circumstances. If the money changer admits that he sold these coins to the customer, or claims that he has yet to receive the dinar, the customer takes an oath by rabbinic ordinance to support his claim while holding a sacred object, and he takes the coins. If the money changer claims that the dinar is payment for these coins, but for coins that he sold in the past, and that the customer already took home, the money changer takes an oath by being ordinance to support his claim while holding a sacred object, and he keeps the coins. When Sefer Kinin Hira Mechira 29, Shulchan Aruch Mikvah 91:9. Give me small coins valued at a dinar, and he gave him the coins, and subsequently the money changer said to him, give me the dinar. And the customer said to him, I gave it to you, and he put it in your wallet. The customer shall take an oath that he paid. If the customer gave the money changer the dinar, and then said to him, give me the coins, and the money changer said to him, I gave them to you, and you cast them into your purse, the money changer shall take an oath. Over here it says, it is not the money changer's way to give even an issa until he receives the dinar. Therefore, the fact that the customer received the coins indicates the money changer had already received his payment. These cases of taking an oath are just like other cases where the sages said that one takes an oath and receives payment. The Mishnah in Ketubah 87a teaches a woman who vitiates her marriage contract. In a case, a woman admits that she has received part of her marriage contract payment and demands the rest, and the customer claims that she received all of it or more than what she claims she has received. She receives the remainder only after taking an oath. This is halacha even if she has witnesses as to the amount she's already received, and even if she gives an exact accounting down to half butter of what she received. The same halacha applies to a creditor who vitiates his promissory note, and that's from the Rambam Sefer Nashim Hilchot Yishud 16:14, Sefer Mishpatim Hilchot Ma'av Velova 14:1, Shulchan Aruch Even Ezer 967, and the Choshen Mishpat 84:1. Ketubah. A marriage contract is a legal document given by a husband to his wife upon their marriage, stating his obligation towards her during and after their marriage. The contract includes a lien on the husband's estate, the minimum amount being 200 dinars for a virgin bride and 100 dinars for other brides, payable if he divorces her or she becomes widowed. While the general guidelines for marriage contract stipulated by the Talmud, its specific provisions are often based on local custom. In addition, the marriage contract may include individual stipulations agreed to by the husband and wife. The marriage contract gives the marriage halachic legitimacy, and without one, the couple's relationship is considered licentious. And there's a picture here from a marriage contract from Venice in the 18th century. By acknowledging receipt of partial payment, may collect the remainder only by taking an oath, or if one witness testifies that her marriage contract has been paid. In a case where a woman demands a marriage contract payment and the husband claims that she has already received all of it, or one witness testifies she received all or part of it, she received the payment only taking an oath. The same halacha applies to a creditor via a promissory note. Rambam Sefer Nashim Hilchot Yishud 16:15, Sefer Mishpatim Hilchot Ma'av Velova 14:1, Shulchan Aruch Even Ezer 968, Choshen Mishpat 84:5. She may collect only by taking an oath. She may collect it from property that has been sold to a third party or from property of orphans. In a case where a woman demands payment of a marriage contract not in the presence of her husband, or demands payment to repossession of fields that a third party bought from the husband, or demands payment from the orphans, she receives payment only after taking an oath, patterned after an oath by Torah law. The same halacha applies to a creditor demanding payment of a loan recorded in a promissory note. Rambam Sefer Nashim Hilchot Yishud 16:16, 19-20, Sefer Mishpatim Hilchot Ma'av Velova 14:1, Shulchan Aruch Even Ezer 6:1-9-10, Choshen Mishpat 106:1, 108:17, 114:4. Only by taking an oath, and a woman who collects it from her husband's property when not in his presence may collect it only by taking an oath. And likewise, orphans may collect a loan with a promissory note inherited from the father only by taking an oath. If a creditor dies and his heirs come to collect the debt, but the debtor claims that he's already paid the debt to the creditor himself, and the heirs say that they do not know, the debtor must pay the sum recorded in the promissory note. If the debtor demands that the heirs of the creditor take an oath, then they must take an oath while holding a sacred object, that the creditor in no way notified them that the debt was paid, and that no document was found indicating payment of the promissory note, and then the heirs receive payment from the debtor. If the debtor died after the creditor, and the heirs of the creditor demand payment, They must take an oath that the creditor in no way indicated that it was paid, including having left no document indicating it. The oath must be taken by any heir of the creditor, even if he was an infant when the creditor died. Maggid Mishnah. Such an heir takes an oath that he could find no indication that it was paid, since he could not have heard anything from the creditor, as he was only an infant when he died. If the creditor specified before he died that the promissory note was not paid, then the heirs do not need to take an oath to collect the debt, even from the heirs of the debtor. I'm safe in the Mishpat, over 17:1-2, Shulchan Aruch Mitzvot 185-9. Orphans who wish to collect payment of money owed to their father must take the following oath. On our oath, our father did not direct us on his deathbed not to collect with his promissory note, and our father did not say to us that the note was paid, and we did not find among our father's documents a record showing that the promissory note was paid. After taking that oath, they may collect the money. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says, even if the son was born after the father's death, although such a son cannot take an oath about what his father did during his life or on his deathbed, he can take an oath that he did not find any indication among his father's documents that the promissory note was paid, and he thereby receives payment of the debt. He needs to take an oath in order to receive the money owed to his father. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, if there are witnesses that the father had said at the time of his death his promissory note has not been paid, the son collects the debt without having taken an oath. And these people are sometimes required to take an oath that they do not owe anything, even if there is no explicit claim against them. Partners, sharecroppers, stewards, apotropin, from the Greek epitropos, meaning an appointee. The sages usually use this word to refer to a steward appointed to attend to matters pertaining to minors or to themselves who are unable to handle those matters themselves. They also use the word to mean one appointed by a property owner to take care of his assets. A woman who does business from home, where she manages the property for orphans, and the member of the household appointed to manage the household affairs. For example, in a case where one of these people said to one of the people whose property he or she manages, "What is your claim against me?" If the other replied, "It is simply my wish that you take an oath to me that you have not taken anything of mine," the former is liable to take that oath. One of the partners or the sharecroppers has divided. In a case where partners divided their joint property, or the sharecropper stopped working the field, or the husband and wife divorced, or the managing member of the household left the household, or an agent bought the merchandise for the money sent him, or bought the money from what he sold for him. In any of the cases, the contract relationship ended, and the other partner or the owner of the field or the husband did not demand an oath from them immediately, he cannot later return to his uncertain claim and demand an oath. But if he has a different definite claim against him, he can demand an oath about that and extend that demand to acquire an oath about any other claim that he had. Sefer Kinyan Shluchan Shutofin 9:7, Shulchan Aruch Mitzvot 93:6. The common property, each taking a share, then one side may not claim an oath of the other absent a definite claim. But if an oath was imposed upon him due to some other situation, that oath can be extended to impose upon him any other oath. It can be extended to apply to any other of their disputes. The Mishnah adds, the Sabbatic abrogates the obligation to take an oath about a debt, just like it abrogates a debt. If the Sabbatic abrogates a debt, it abrogates any oath connected to that debt. Therefore, an oath imposed by judges and similar oaths about a debt can be abrogated by the sabbatical year if the litigant would admit to it, abrogated by the sabbatical year. An oath of the baileys and of partners and similar oaths are not abrogated by the sabbatical year. The reason is that if he were to admit to the claim, the sabbatical year would not abrogate it because it relates to a deposit and not to a loan. And that's in the Rambam Sefer Zerayim, Hilchot Shemitah V'Yovel 967, Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 67:6. About a debt, just like it abrogates a debt, the Mishnah teaches all those who take an oath that is legislated by the Torah take an oath and do not pay. The Gemara asks, from where do we derive that oath mandated by Torah law serve only to exempt one from payment? We derive from the fact that the verse states, an oath of the Lord shall be between them both, to see whether he has not put his hand on his neighbor's goods, and his owner shall accept it. and he should not make restitution. Exodus 22:10. According to the verse, with regard to he who would otherwise need to pay, it is on him that the obligation to take an oath is imposed. The Mishnah teaches that these litigants take an oath and receive possession of the disputed funds of property, and that this is a hired worker in that category. The Gemara asks, what is different about a hired worker that the sages instituted for him that he take an oath and receive his wages? Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said great halachot were taught here. The Gemara asks, halachot? Are these oaths actually halachot transmitted to Moses from Sinai, as usually indicated by the use of the term halachot? They are instituted by rabbinic law. Rather say great ordinances were taught here. The Gemara asks, since the ordinances are called great, can one conclude by inference that there are also minor ordinances? Are there rabbinic ordinances that are less important? Ella Amar Rabbi Nachman Amar Shmuel. Permanent ordinances were taught here. The sage uprooted the oath from the employer and imposed it upon the hired worker due to the fact that his wages are his livelihood. The Gemara asks, due to the need to protect the hired worker's livelihood, do we penalize the employer by leaving him vulnerable to a dishonest worker? The Gemara answers the employer himself is amenable to the hired worker taking an oath and collecting his wages, so that labourers will accept employment from him. If the workers are not protected in this manner, they will be wary of accepting work. The Gemara asks, on the contrary, isn't it preferable for the hired worker that in a case of a dispute between them, the employer takes an oath and releases from payment? He would agree to this arrangement in order to create conditions in which the employer will readily hire him. If employers are exposed to the risk of being cheated by dishonest workers, they'll be wary of hiring. The Gemara answers, the employer perforce hires workers since he needs the work done. The Gemara asks, doesn't the hired worker also perforce affect employment since he needs it for his livelihood? Rather, the reason the worker takes the oath is that the employer is distracted with managing his labourers. Even if he has only a single employee, the halacha remains the same transferred, since such is the principle with rabbinic ordinances. The halachot is decided for the general situation and applies even to exceptional specific cases that are different, says the Ritva. In the Jerusalem Talmud explained differently, the employer has many different concerns, business and otherwise, which might preoccupy him and cause him to forget that he has not paid his workers. So it is reasonable to assume that he forgot to pay. The Gemara raises a difficulty, but if it is presumed the employer forgot to pay, then give the wages to the worker without the worker taking an oath. Since this is not the case, well, one side suspects the falsehood, but similar case where the distracted employer has assumed that he actually paid, perhaps the worker's statement should be accepted at face value, since he liked to remember the circumstances correctly. The response is that the sage institutes an oath to quell any concerns about deceit that the employer may have. The Gemara explains the oath was instituted to alleviate the concerns of the employer, to ensure him that he not be cheated. And why did the sages not institute that the employer should give the worker his wages in the presence of witnesses so that it could readily be established whether he was paid? Well, answers, finding witnesses whenever he pays wages would be a burdensome matter for him. And why did the sages not institute that the employer should give him his wages at the outset when he hires him, so there'd be no need for an oath? The Gemara answers, they both want the work to be done on credit, i.e. before the wages are paid, and sometimes sometimes the employer has no money ready when he hires a worker, and the worker also prefers receiving his money at the end of the day. Thank you very much for listening, and wish you all the best. Bye.